So with that wealth of information though, you know, sometimes beginning teachers in particular can be overwhelmed by that.
Yeah.
So, and you've sort of talked about the process of using them, but could you maybe be a touch more specific about the process you think a teacher should go through to plan? So, for example, they might start with 2 or 3 outcomes, you know, have a look at the elaborations in the source book guidelines to see how they might, you know, for information
sure,
and then how that might align to the essential learnings, you know, to perhaps write up some assessment or whatever.
Okay. That's one of the key issues about where do I start, and I think that's a really legitimate concern, not only for teachers, full stop. My advice is to think about selecting some outcomes, but also selecting a context in which you would teach those outcomes. So it's a bit of a back and forth conversation between, all right, this is, I want to do a unit, about my local environment. Here's some SOSE outcomes that match that. Here's some arts outcomes I could use. Here's one science outcome I could use. So it's about, all right, I've got the outcomes. These all relate to learning relating to the local environment. Now, looking closely at these outcomes, how will I polish up this context? And the context might go from my local environment to caring for waterways in my district, or an action plan for caring for the waterways, or protecting and representing our river systems. So you sort of have that conversation between the outcomes and the context. And I think I've sort of talked about it. That gives you clarity about what you have to teach. The third conversation I think you have is one between how am I going to measure whether the students have demonstrated the outcomes. And one of the key things about the QCAR project, curriculum assessment and reporting, it's about aligning those things. And the alignment story is fundamental to teaching, learning and assessment. I think Bernstein is the author of the famous triangle where we talk about curriculum assessment and pedagogy as being the things that need to be aligned. And what the syllabus documents do is try to talk about each of those things. So I think the process is about having those conversations. And once you're very clear about, one, what's your curriculum intent, what outcomes you are going to give kids the opportunity to demonstrate. The second thing is, what is the context that you're going to teach those in? The third one is, what assessment are you going to use to measure that demonstration? Once you have that clear, then the fun bit begins, and that's searching for resources and thinking about ways in which you can deliver some of the learning experiences. So a lot of times people start with the fun bit because it is the fun bit. I think you need to actually have sometimes you're thinking about assessment and what you're actually going to teach your kids. You do think about the learning activities, but then I think that becomes another important conversation afterwards. So having what you're going to do, how you're going to assess it really clear, and then looking for resources and activities. The last thing that a lot of people forget about is thinking about a way in which you're going to evaluate the unit at the end, or evaluate the set of learning experiences, because this is not a process where you have this particular unit sorted and then you'll teach that the same way to every group of kids. So as you probably read about your middle schooling, not only is there some certain demands about kids in the middle years, but they all have really unique groups within them. So teaching one group of kids about, my local waterway is going to be a bit different to teaching another group. So having some process to evaluate units, what worked really well, what didn't, what you would change next time. So I think that's important. So, and sort of skipping back to the documents a bit, I think that's a really important thing, is to look at the core learning outcomes in the syllabus documents. If you are going to go down the road of planning using the essential learnings, then you don't need to look at the core learning outcomes. You need to look at the essential learnings. They are your key curriculum drivers. So you go through the same process as you would with core learning outcomes. you've kind of got the process now where, well, you've got the situation now where in Queensland, some people will be planning using outcomes. All Education Queensland schools have to start using the essential learnings this year. So there's going to be a bit of a mix of curriculum intent, if you like, but it'll eventually move all over to essential learnings. So that's something to, looking at those centerpieces of the syllabus, I think, is the important thing. And then the other thing is, don't be afraid to experiment with different ways of doing things. Because in the philosophy of middle school, and we're talking about engaging the learner, about the unique needs of young adolescents, of the unique needs of certain sections within that middle phase. So it's an opportunity for you to try some things out. It's and I think that's a really important thing to think about as well. So I don't know if I've covered that one okay?
Yeah. I just want to go back to your point about, if you're planning with the outcomes, then you're planning with the outcomes, and if you're planning with the essential learnings, you're planning with the essential learnings. Yeah. I think, there's probably going to be quite a bit of confusion around that initially within schools, as you say. I mean, is it a situation where, let's say, the students do decide, well, we're just going to use the essential learnings?
Yeah.
Is it a case of, you would suggest, not only do they look at those essential learnings, but they look back through the syllabus documents, look at the outcomes, the elaborations and so on, kind of mine those for ideas. And,
definitely.
And because that's where a lot of your ideas for your activities come from.
Yeah. I definitely think that's a process. It's just about, it's again getting into that clarity of focus issue. With planning, you need one set of curriculum intent, but you could have multiple sources of trying to inform that curriculum intent. So if you're using the essential learnings, I think the process is a really wise one, because the essential learnings are fundamentally based on the outcomes. So what we did was, I often describe it as getting the outcomes and putting them into a funnel to try and get the essence of the outcomes out of them. And we made those things called the essential learnings. Some of us in some key learning areas weren't so lucky because we had some other forces that came in, which were the National Consistency Project. So that basically we went to the process of shrinking down to the essential learnings, and then we were forced by legislation to put some more things in. So the SOSE ones you'll see that are very heavy in civics and citizenship, because that was the decision made that certain bits of civics and citizenship should be known by all students, so they were put into them. But the process of using the elaborations, I think, is particularly important, because you'll see phrases in the essential learnings that will be similar to those in the outcomes, and those phrases are deconstructed and decoded in the elaborations. But just, I suppose, be really clear about see a set of things on the website that were called essential learnings for SOSE and the arts. You need to print those off and put them in one place. You have some syllabus documents, you need to keep them in one place, and then you'll have these other supporting documents like the sourcebook guidelines. And just to know that the essential learnings are actually going to take over from that syllabus. So it's a really messy part of curriculum reform. But they all have relationships too. I think that's an important thing that you've pointed out too, that one isn't redundant at this point.